All right, well, welcome everybody to the Palm Springs Unified School District regular meeting of the Board of Education. Today is January 25th, 2022. I will now call the meeting to order, and can we begin with a roll call, please?
Member Espericueta,
Here.
Board Member Cornett,
Here.
Board Member Wood,
Here.
Board Member Durrell, and Board Member Girardi.
I'm here. Our first item is a study session. This is item number 2, and I think Dr. Murray is going to introduce this.
Thank you, President Girardi. Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Arthur, our Executive Director of Facilities Planning and Development, to give the first facility study session report of the calendar year. So, Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our first facility study session of 2022, and we've got some exciting, fun things to talk about today. So our agenda, we're starting off with, we're going to review our June 8th facility study session, and unfortunately I was not here, and I want to extend a big thanks to Brian for stepping in for me. It was a very bad night for me with food poisoning the night before, so I apologize so much. And then we're going to review our redevelopment projects. We're going to talk about Measure E and I bond projects. We're going to give an update on Desert Learning Academy project and kind of share for the first time where we are on that. We'll talk about our battery storage and our EV charging stations, and then we're going to look at some potential new actions and projects. So on June 8th, the outcomes of that facility study session, it was agreed upon to move forward with the addition of electric vehicle charging stations, bringing those into our current Phase 1 modernization projects, which is Sunny Sands Elementary, Landau Elementary, Bubbling Wells, James Workman, Della Lindley, and we already have them at Cathedral City High School. We'll talk about that later. And also to include them as part of the Rio Vista and MSJ solar projects, as well as our high school and DACs. So those costs will be associated, will be with the project budget or as identified with our our energy project budget that we've got identified. Also, I think Brian shared with you a little bit about we're really trying to plan for the future of how we're going to take our district fleet, our white fleet, and what our long-term plan is going to be to replace those with electric vehicles. We know that in 2035, the state of California will cease selling gas-powered cars, and so we would like to be prepared for that and have a plan as we switch our white fleet over the next few years. So with that, the first we're going to look at is our redevelopment projects. And this seems like a small list, but we really have so many more. So our minor capital project is ongoing, and that's where our schools actually submit to us forms for small projects that they'd like to see happen at their school sites. Some of those projects have actually started to be bigger projects, like the auxiliary gym floor at Desert Hot Springs High started out as an MCP. So those can we've got small ones and things that go bigger. And as you see, we've got our auxiliary gym floor replacement. That actually, we show it as bidding, but the bids were opened, and that contract will be awarded at the February 8th board meeting. We've got our solar battery storage micro review talking about. We've got our district administration center building alteration funds and our solar canopies at Rio Vista and MSJ, which are just about wrapping up completion. So with that, what you're also seeing for the first time on here is our district-wide furniture replacement funding. Now this is a 2-year projection. So this was not approved at the June study session, but because of the high need we had, it was approved at Cabinet in October. And so we're going to bring this forward and ratify this. And it is $3.9 million over a 2-year period. Desert Hot Springs High gym floor, as I said, we'll be awarding that contract. You're going to see, we're going to ask for just a little bump as we're awarding that from the project budget, only because we need to make sure we are covered on our inspection and a few other timing issues. Our district administration center alterations, we've just finished up adding the 2 offices in our ed services department. They came out great. If you have a chance to peek in, they look like they've always should have been there. And then, of course, our solar canopies at Rio Vista and MSJ are wrapping up. and then our solar battery storage and microgrids, where we'll talk about our batteries a little later in the presentation. So with that, these are our annual ongoing expenses that come out of our redevelopment fund. And usually you'll see $2 million each year that is assigned to technology for buying student devices. Well, we know that in our redevelopment funds will eventually end, and we've talked about that. We bring that up once a year, what that projection is. And so we've been fortunate to use our CARES and ESSER funds last year and this year to cover that $2 million. So we're actually pushing that money down the road to further that out on redevelopment. Our routine restricted maintenance, you can see it's at $4.4 million now. That's gone up $600,000, and that's based on 3% off of our general fund. Our communication tower maintenance, our air links, that stayed pretty steady. And then our Edom Hill lease for the antennas and some of our ETS POs. Usually you see a difference there is because some of the POs are set up for emergency basis that ETS uses if something came down or crashed. If it's not used, those funds are remaining, are swept back into the general amount for our redevelopment fund. And then our TACWIS leases there, and of course our MCP funds. You can see for the 2023 year, it's $200,000. The reason the 21 and 22 are a little different is if any remaining funds with the MCP of that $200,000 are not spent in the current year, we push them over to the next year. And so that's basically what you're seeing, the difference in that amount there.
Julie,
Yes.
for the student technology devices, and maybe Brian can answer this too, when you look at for the next school year, 23, 24, can that 2,000, can we at the end of the school year 22, can we then go ahead and buy some of those technology devices out of the CARES money before it runs out? So we don't have to spend wherever that money's coming from, redevelopment?
Yes, you can, or we can.
Absolutely. It's in there as just a projection.
Mm-hmm.
We do have that ability to move that down the road as long as we are covered with other funding for those same devices.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Right. All right, so wrapping all of this up, it comes down with, you can kind of see we've used up a couple $1 million, and most of that is what we identified for our district-wide furniture replacement, leaving us with a projected balance on June 30th of 23 with $16 million. Now that may go up a little bit. We have actually received a little higher revenues from the cities that have come in, so we've been very thrilled with that. And so that comes in, we put it in our balance, and we look to see how we can move that down on our funds. So next up are our Measure E and I bond projects. So in the Measure E bond projects, our first phase of modernization for the Bubbling Wells, Della Lindley, Landau, Sunny Sands, James Workman, and Cathedral City High. And this is just the design phase that is being paid for out of Measure E. And then we've got our Desert Hot Springs High locker room HVAC, which has been completed. We're still working on a little programming on that issue, but it was a very nice project. Our Palm Springs High seismic renovation, we put 95% on. We've got some punch lists. We've got a couple little items we need to do, but all the buildings have been turned over to the school for use, including the gym, auxiliary gym, cafeteria. All that is in use by the students at the high school at this time. Our Prop 39 lighting and HVAC projects, our last of our projects, you're seeing that running out, and the last one we're using those funds for is replacing the lighting in the black box theater at Palm Springs High. And then our central plant replacement, Richard Center, that is in construction. Our contractor's been working on it. We've ordered the new central plant equipment. It's still a ways out. We did bring in a temporary chiller so that we're leasing that, and that will maintain the temperature in the Richard Center while we're waiting for all of the equipment to come in. And then,
Julie, I have the question in the old projects that are in the design phase. That one, what means that part? Who's
So-
doing the design phase? Yeah.
great question. So when we say the design phase there is the first phase of a project that we assign our architects to look, and we do scoping. We look at the needs of those campuses. We look at what we think potentially budget-wise we could do. We start putting those together, and we start with our design, actually drawing plans that will be submitted to DSA. Now that's different than our construction project budget, and we've not asked for some of these for that budget yet. So you'll see in Measure I, we have asked for 3 project budgets and pushing it in those. But we started off just with the design. And, you know, our set of plans usually is about this thick, sheets long, and that's what the contractors bid on. So that's our first phase, and that's what we need to have happen first is the design that identifies all the needs and what will happen at the schools. And of course, as we know at Lando and Sunny Sands, that's replacement of buildings. James Workman is replacement of portables, and that design there. So all those designs are what we start with, and we pay those up front with the architect first.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, our facility master plan, we've got that ongoing. We're trying to get that updated, trying to add some of our transitional kinder plans in that. Our elementary shade, structures, and trees, we say 95% complete. We've installed the trees in the Desert Hot Springs elementary schools, and we're in the process of acquiring the trees for our Cathedral City, Rancho Mirage, Palm Springs elementary schools, and then we will actually bid out the installation. So each of those schools, elementary schools, excluding Lando and Sunny Sands, because we're doing that in the modernization, gets 9 trees. And most of the trees are determined by what the existing trees are on those sites. District-wide drinking fountains is just about done. I think Greg is finishing up his last little bit of money. He's putting some drinking fountains in at Cielo Vista Charter. And then our new elementary site at Desert Hot Springs is on hold. And then our parking lot renovation at Dell Lindley is complete. And again, this kind of shows you where we are on our budget.
Yeah, I just have one question about the parking lot renovation. When we have renovated some of these parking lots at schools where there will be a total modernization, will that fit into the current plans and they won't have to be more renovation?
Absolutely. Della Lindley, Sunny Sands, Landau, even Bubbling Wells, we had renovated that parking lot about 8 years ago. So those designs are actually given to the architect to keep and make sure that it doesn't affect those. The only possibility, something that could change, is if we found something that was not in compliance on ADA. But most of them, we have done them so recently, it just fits well with what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, again, our budgets were in good shape. We're going to have a little, you're going to see this, most of Palm Springs High seismic, as we know, is complete. We've got a little bit, but we've got several $1 million that will probably, out of that project budget, come back. And so you'll see a little later in the presentation, I'm asking for a little bit of that money be spent, come out of that project and be spent on a couple new projects. Again, any funds left over get swept out once we're totally complete and put back into the bond fund budget to be assigned to other projects. Again, going through, we've got at the end here, you can see our little closeout of our Ed Winslow F&E, Nellie Kaufman, Inimont, and Agua Caliente reconstruction. We had about $261,000 and change that goes back into the Measure E general balance that can be then shared with other school projects. So what it comes down to after all of this is said and done, we've got $2.1 million left of Measure E bond funds. And that is our estimate at the end of June 30th of 2023. So now we'll talk about our Measure I. And this is just our little bit of a roadmap to remind us how we got to Measure I. So our Measure E bond fund was passed in February of 2008. Several tranches were sold, A, B, C, and D. We had a remaining authorization of $216 million, and in July 2016. And so what we did is we went back to our voters and asked if they would reauthorize that. And what we were doing in 2016 is it was very difficult to sell a tranche of any size. And so we asked our voters to prove a little higher on that so that our assessed evaluation, we'd be able to sell our tranche. We did that, and we held on with our Measure E funds, and we did not use that $216 million until April of 21, where we sold our first series, and we'll talk about what that was assigned to in just a second. Our first series was $118 million. We have remaining authorization of $98 million, and that's just authorization. We don't have that cash in hand. That's just out there that we would have to sell in a future tranche on the bond series. We're probably several years out on that, of being able to touch that. So this is how we had signed our funds right now. Our Della Lindley, these are our project we talked about. This is the actual construction project budgets that we have assigned to Della Lindley, Landau, Sunny Sands, and then we have the ongoing bond costs for Measure I. And so all in all, that leaves us roughly with $19 million of unassigned Measure I project funds. I'm sure all of you along with me know that that will be swept up pretty quick once we actually start bidding the Landau, Sunny Sands, and Della Lindley projects. We know our cost acceleration has been up and down, and it's just a target waiting to happen. So as we get closer to it, we'll come back in with our estimates, let you know, but that's what I see happening with those $19 million. And next is Desert Learning Academy project, and this is a little bit more fun than talking about our bond project numbers, but this is the first time we've actually in public shown this. And if you remember a little history on it, the Desert Learning Academy, the 500 building, the multipurpose room, was actually built in 1963. And in 2017, when we started our Palm Springs High seismic assessment of each of the buildings that were built prior to 1980, this one stood out greatly. The building components, it has steel beams, but it's mostly a metal modular wrapped around it, and it also has a flexible diaphragm on the roof, which seismically, for this size of the building, is not a good thing. So in looking, our engineer, we looked, seeing what we needed to do to bring it up to seismic code compliance if we had kept it in the Palm Springs High project like we did the other buildings there. And in this one we found that we were not able, the cost to bring it up seismically to what it needs to happen was more than the cost of a new building. So the thought was, at that time was, you know what, let's replace the building. And because at that time, if we used the money to bring it up seismically, we'd still have a 50-year-old building with a 50-year-old plumbing, with 50-year-old walls that was designed for teaching 50 years ago. So with that, we have been meeting over the last several years. I'm going to say we had a little hold because of COVID. As much as we think these are amazing, fascinating things, we had to step back a little bit and work on this. So that's why you're seeing this probably so late from when we started. But it did give us a lot of time in working with how we could actually reimagine and put things together that we think need to happen for this building that will teach our students over the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we met with multiple departments. We met with several administrations. We met with ETIS, all kinds of people brought in. Simone has been a great help in meeting on this and seeing the vision here, which we appreciate. And so meeting with Cabinet, their input, and with that, we basically put together this building. And so this building is a little less square footage, but it was meant to actually be designed to be as flexible as possible and how we see some things happening. So this is looking at the building with the roof off. And what you're going to see is we have an entry courtyard that is actually covered. We have an assembly area to be as flexible as possible. We have an ed tech stadium. We have professional development and live streaming area. We have that outside lunch area that's covered that actual work as an outside classroom. We have 3 different classroom studios set up. And so with that, this is the concept for you to see a little more what we believe this can be. And one of the big items in this that I had a big learning curve on, thank you Eddie and Will, is our esports competitions. And so part of this building, in working with Palm Springs High administration, Desert Learning Academy administration, and all the different components together, we've actually included in this building a esports ed tech stadium. And what's interesting about this is not that it's just set up with a room, but actually it has a raised floor. And so it kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but the actual concrete will be depressed, leaving about 12 inches between the top of the floor and the actual concrete base, which will allow us to have electrical and data flexible and moved any way we want with this room over forever. So however the needs change, in this EdTech Stadium area, we can do that. And so right now it's designed roughly with about, I think, 3 different, so the 5 people on a competition, you've got 3 here. We also have a waiting room area and 1 in the back for those getting ready to play and come out. And what you'll see is that assembly area that opens up to it, that actually will have the big screens up on top. So parents, competitors, community members can actually come in and watch the esports competition take place. It's also a great place for training. Students, staff in that assembly area. It's meant to be inviting, relaxing area, and of course bring in as much flexibility as possible. One of the other components that we kind of have learned from our COVID is our live stream and professional development recording and editing areas. And the idea for this is that, and Eddie taught me a lot about live stream, thank you again on that, is that we needed rooms that were set up for recording. So you're not bringing your camera in on your computer. These cameras will be set up in the room, green screens behind you, so you're actually teaching to the camera as you're standing, just like you would be in a classroom. Now, you can record these, you can walk outside and use the editing studio to edit these. You can actually live stream this if you had a class that you wanted to teach at all 4 high schools at the same time. You could live stream and teach this through there. Again, if you wanted to record some supplemental education for any of our curriculum programs, you could do this and have that available. It just makes all these possible, and having the editing there, and you can actually also teach in there. So this is one of the unique things that we think will add to the benefit of this building and how we see the future of our education. And this is our reimagined building concept. And the idea is we wanted this building to be as fun and as exciting as what's going to take place inside of it. So this is, you can kind of see our look here. And again, this is our concept on that. So before I move on, any questions on this?
Any chance there'll be issues with the Historical Site Preservation Committee?
No, this is not considered historical. And it is in our historic review at Palm Springs High. You know, we did have some historic buildings, the dining hall, the ASB, the library, those were all considered historic buildings. This is not.
I'm just curious, Julie, those classrooms that face Ramon Road that have the tile roofs, those are then going to be
This-
the white study courtyard and then behind the
yeah,
white area?
I'll just go, sorry, back real quick. So as you can see here, it's in the center of what we call the 200, 300 wing, and then the 700 wings on the other side. So it's really in that middle courtyard. You won't see most of this building from the street.
And
But
those-
we do have a lovely courtyard right on the other side of the 400 building between the 200 and 400. That will be the entry courtyard going directly to this building.
are those classrooms in use right now for DLA?
The 200 and 300 wing, yes and no.
Okay.
Some are, some aren't. They're usable. They're actually very good classrooms.
I just wonder, they look so empty when I go by.
I'll just add, Member Jarrell, Clerk Jarrell, that even a classroom right now at DLA that is, quote, in use might have 3 students or 5 so they really don't have any of those 30 kids per classroom situations. Or they may just be there 2 days a week.
All right, with that, we get to do something even more exciting, battery storage. So we can start off with, just again, a quick review. We have had a third party look at what if we had battery storage here at PSUSD, what would that do? It identified the battery storage size and time we needed was about 4 hours. And the idea is that we're going to make energy with our solar. Then we're going to store that in these batteries. And at high time of use or high peak demand use, we actually can use our energy that we stored and then keep coming back, refilling, and storing again. And the idea is to kind of smooth out our demand throughout the day. So Rancho Mirage High School, I know we've talked about this several times in the past, when their high time of use is 6:15 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. Why? That's when all essential plants turn on. That's when everything turns on. And when equipment turns on, it draws a huge amount of energy. And that 15-minute time can actually cost us $7,000 a month. Even though we could make more solar than we need that month, that's what we pay for. So the idea of these batteries is actually to help offset that load. And the batteries themselves have software that actually learn from when the load pull is, whether it's at night, the morning when the equipment turns on, and we'll be able to keep tweaking that to find out when that time is so we can pull that storage out. We don't have to release all 4 hours at one time. It can just be for 20 or 30 minutes in the morning. It can be in the evening if we're using it, if we're not making solar at that time. So that's the idea of our battery storage. So right now, we spent roughly a little over $2 million. We did receive self-generating incentive of $868,000. What we're looking is our first year utility savings, what our expenses are. Our average simple payback is 7.4 years, and I'll show you on the next slide how that kind of averages out. And we know that these batteries are warranted for 15 years. So we believe we're in a win-win situation on that. So this breaks down each of the 4 high schools and the administration center on the batteries. And you can kind of see some of the payback on the simple payback, second to the last line. Some schools, Desert Hot Springs High, has a 9.2 years payback. Why? They're actually our most energy efficient high school we have. They're an Energy Star high school, and so the more efficient you are, the longer the payback time. And you can kind of see Rancho Mirage and both Cathedral City, they're 6.9. Why? They're central plant schools. So they actually draw more at the time. So it's just the way that it's set up. On the next slide, I'm going to go through Rancho Mirage High School as an example and kind of show you where the net savings, how they're actually calculated. Each of the schools and administration center have one of these, but I just briefly wanted to show, because if you thought, hey, this line isn't adding up. So basically what makes our revenue up of $120,000 at Rancho Mirage High School the first year is the biggest thing is our S-chip incentive. And then we've got some demand savings. And then we have storage energy arbitrage. Storage energy arbitrage is when we're using our cheap power out of our battery instead of buying high price power. That's what the arbitrage is. So we basically come to $120,000 worth of revenue the first year. We then take our expenses of $6,992, which is from our annual O&M, operations maintenance costs, and then our software monitoring costs. We deduct that out of our revenue, which gives us a net savings at Rancho Mirage High School of $113,000. So we have one of these for each of the high schools and the administration center. And if you're interested, I'm more than happy to share the spreadsheet with you, but I just wanted to give you a little bit to show you how this is actually calculated.
And Judy, the storage life cycle, that one is the life of the batteries, but can be more, or
It absolutely can be more, but they're guaranteeing it for 15 years. Very simple. It could go 20. But again, that's our guarantee right now is 15 years. Okay, I'll move on. So our battery project has started. They're at Palm Springs High. They've trenched through there. So each of these sites are kind of sequencing out where they're going to come in, they're going to trench, they're going to set the pads for the batteries, they'll get the connections. But then what they'll do is the batteries won't be on each site individually. They'll bring all the batteries in at once, and they'll bring a crane in, and then we're going to set the batteries all in 1 to 2 days at all the sites. Why? It's actually economy of scale by only renting a crane for 1 to 2 days. And so we're saving a little bit of money that way. So even though Palm Springs High will be ready, it won't happen until after Rancho Mirage High is ready to go. But the batteries have already been purchased, and waiting to be brought in. All right, our electric vehicle charging stations. Quick reminder, Cathedral City High, we were a benefit of a grant from Southern California Edison, their Charge Ready pilot program. We were one of the first schools here in the desert to be chosen and move forward with this. And we have 12 EV charging stations that were put in the student parking lot at Cathedral City High. Here's a picture of those stations. They finished up and completed the installation in December. And right now we are working on getting the charge point software set up. I've got a meeting Thursday that will further, we've put our application in. We've done one little training where we had maintenance at ETIS. There were quite a few of us who did a Zoom training to see it, but now it's where it comes down to really doing it. So applications in, we've got Thursday meeting set, and so we should be up and charging, available to charge sometime in the next couple weeks.
And the charging will be available 24 hours?
It's going to be, so there's programming with that. I personally would not charge after dark because right now our solar is offsetting those charges. And so charging after dark would be a higher cost to us. And so it's kind of hard on our software, what I've learned so far. It starts off at one price, on a kilowatt price. And so that's why I'm not sure we're going to do much after dark. We'd like to keep, and now we may be once our batteries are set, and we can reprogram that, but right now until our batteries are replaced, I probably wouldn't charge after dark. All right, potential new actions for our bond and redevelopment projects as our facilities master plan. So the first item, Desert Hot Springs High School, came in as an MCP. And this is lighting for the walkway and parking lot near the stadium at the high school. When solar was put in about 8 years ago, the lighting was removed, the lighting poles were removed, and the lighting is under the solar panels. Well, these ones happen to face the other way, only to benefit because it has the most amount of sun. So with this, we've been out looking at this. It really would benefit, especially for after night at football games, as much light as possible. We think that we could probably put some lighting on the building and then maybe reuse one or two of our power poles that we took down from here when we put our solar in. But we gave it estimate. We need to hire a lighting engineer to make sure that we are have this correct. And so again, started as an MCP, much larger, but it is, I believe, a safety issue that needs to be addressed. The second item is ratifying the district-wide furniture replacement funding, which is 1.9, a little over 1.9 million each year for 2 years, with a total of 3.9 million. Again, replacing our furniture at our schools is in many areas such a high need. So these are well-used dollars. We actually had a replacement fund, about 6-7 years ago that we went through, and really purchasing did a great job in getting that furniture out to the schools. And then Palm Springs High School, class 900 and 901. So those classrooms were where the junior ROTC programs were being held. That program is no longer there. Those classrooms still have some chalkboards in them and some shelving that went with the ROTC program. So the high school, again, this came in as an MCP. The high school would like to use these two classrooms as updated classrooms. And so we need to come in and remove some of the shelving that was in there for the ROTC program. We need to get some little lighting updated, so it's the efficient lighting. It may be probably, I don't think it's original from '63, but it's at least from the 90s. And so getting some nice LED in there, getting some new carpeting in there, and then getting the wall, some tack panel needs to happen. It would make these classrooms usable classrooms again and bring it up to the other classroom standards. And then the last one is the locker rooms at Nellie Coffin Middle School. Again, this came in as an MCP. Walking the locker rooms at Nellie Coffin, both the girls and boys, they don't appear to have been updated since they were built in the 70s. They still have the original yellow tile. They still have the original lockers. And there are some big issues with the shower, and most of them have been taken off use. We have side-of-line issues. We have problems with fighting in the boys' locker room because some of the areas cut off and hidden. Both these locker rooms really need to be updated. We do something very similar to what we did at Raymond Cree Middle School. We kind of clear out that area, take some of that, the showers, I think they've got 15 in each side, and no one showers anymore. So DSA would require us to leave a couple handicap and one there, but we could actually take that space and actually utilize it like we did at Raymond Cree and have an indoor classroom in there. So taking roll, lining up, you could actually show educational videos on inclement weather days. Similar, as I said, what we did at Raymond Cree, bringing in new lockers that are, undamaged and current, and helping with the line of sight by taking down a couple walls really needs to happen. So with that, those are the 4 options that I'm bringing forward. And you're saying, how can we pay for these? So here's my thought on how we can pay for these. The lighting at Desert Hot Springs High would be under redevelopment. And also the ratification of the district-wide furniture is under redevelopment as well. This is roughly a little over $4 million, but we still do have $12 million remaining. And again, that's what we have remaining, will be remaining right now. That is not considering future funds that we get over the next several years. And then the Palm Springs High, classrooms 900, 901. So we have roughly around $4 million at Palm Springs High seismic project that is not going to be used in that budget. I would release $3 million, and I would use it for natural is the 900, 901 classroom update at the high school campus. And then I would use the other $2 million to update the locker rooms at Nellie Coffin Middle School. This still, we start with a budget of 1.5, releasing that $3 million back into the fund. We end with a bond budget of 1.6. So with that, that is the end of the presentation. Questions, thoughts?
I have a question, Julie. In light of having difficulty with people wanting to work, do we have challenges like that in having our construction crews come, and are we having challenges
Yes.
locally?
I don't know locally, but right now it's our battery project. It's, again, what the original schedule was is not what it is. You know, sometimes when you're doing an asphalt patch that may only be 10 feet by 10 feet, getting a big company out to do that becomes an issue. So we're seeing some things like that. We are getting bidders, not a lot, but even so, keeping the project running due to sometimes COVID and sometimes supply chain issues, we just keep pushing on it.
And Julie, in any of these projects, when we hear the state government or the federal government about to spend money to upgrade the internet connection, that is not any project or money that is in this presentation?
No, it's not. So the presentation, we're just focusing on bond fund and redevelopment funds, but that is something on some of the federal infrastructure funds. I know Will has been working on that, especially when it comes to internet. I have my eye on one little stream of funds on upgrading, where it says upgrading infrastructure. I'm going to see what I can do about getting in to get some funds for our EV charging infrastructure. I think that falls in line with some of the federal funds that they've identified, and so we'll be trying to pursue those. But no, that it's not in here. Any of those funds we get will supplement what we have.
Supplement. Oh, thank you.
Julie, I'm just curious, I got a couple questions. First, with the Public Utility Commission and Edison and all the utilities, they're changing the net metering and proposing, I guess, receiving more funds or reducing the benefit. How will that affect us?
You know, that's exactly why we started our battery. storage, it will affect us. So basically, it's called NEM, Net Energy Metering 3.0. And so it's been before the Public Utility Commission. In fact, a couple months ago, I was on one of the calls and spoke, and I wasn't overly popular. Needless to say, when they start talking about little increases, I'm like, no, your little increases to us is what you're saying is going to result in millions of increases to our general funds. And so what they're doing is the net energy metering credit. So when we make more kilowatts and it goes back into Edison's system, we get paid for those. Well, Edison is going to change those rules, is what they're trying to do. And so that anything that we put into the system, they'll keep and either pay us very, very little or pay us nothing at all. And unfortunately, that's a change that, when we started down this path almost 9 years ago with solar, no one would conceive that Edison would have that ability to change that. And it seems like right now they're doing it. And so it's shocking. I think you've probably seen articles about how this will kill some of the solar home roofing projects. It doesn't make sense on some of these because Edison is now going to keep your excess kilowatts that you make instead of paying you for them. And that's why it's so important for us to have batteries, is because instead of feeding their system, we store it. We store it, we use it, we recycle it. And that's why it's so important. Also, as part of Cal Green Co., which goes full on enacted in 2023, all of our future projects will require us to have solar, battery, and EV charging. That's why it's so important right now for us to look at any federal funds and try and get EV charging paid for with their funds, not our modernization funds. Because every penny that I have to spend on that takes away from what I can do in the classroom.
Okay, thanks. Do you know how long we're going to continue to receive redevelopment funds?
Right now, we're projected out, and at the next study session, I'll come with an update on that. We're projected out 10 years.
10 more years?
Yeah, 10 more years. And depending on what happens, as Karen said, in 2023, if we still have ESSER or funds there and we're able to supplement it, that just pushes us out farther. And that's kind of our goal. It's just been having those funds to buy those devices. And I mean, we were so ahead of the curve when it came to COVID and our students having them. And that's because of the forethought of having those out there for all of our students and spending that money.
And if I read it right, we get about $4.5 million a year, roughly?
Ruth, is he close on that? Ruth Burgett, our facilities accountant, she's our redevelopment specialist. Are we about $4.5 million or a little? No, we're more than that on redevelopment funds. Aren't we about 11?
Per year? Okay. Oh, good. Because I thought I read that we had like $4.5 million coming in this year. But,
that may
maybe I
be what
misread it.
can actually go back into the project fund.
Okay.
Because we do have some of those that are annual ongoing that we do
Right,
assign.
that makes sense. Thank you. My next question is, with the DLA building, I see we budgeted, I believe, $2.4 million. It sounds like it's being split between developer funds and Measure E funds.
No, that's just the design cost.
That's just the design,
Right.
right?
We will be using developer fees to pay, which is usually something you don't see. Our developer fees are used for where we can renovate and reestablish, taking a building and putting classrooms in it. So by taking that multi-purpose room and changing it up and adding classrooms to it, we qualify to use our developer fee funds, and which we have waiting for us and sitting to use, which is a great thing. So once we use our design, because remember that design came out of the Palm Springs High Seismic Project, we assigned that to it. Once our design fund is done, we'll start using our developer fees to pay for this.
Okay, so the construction is going to come out of the developer fees.
Correct.
All right. And then my final question is, we're getting close to using up all our funds. How's the timing? How do we plan for the next bond issuance?
That's a great question. Brian and I have talked about that. I think as we get ready to look at that last tranche sale of the $98 million of Measure I, because remember, we've got $98 million sitting there that we've not sold yet, that authorization. So once we get close to doing that, and I probably want to say that's 2-3 years away maybe, that's when I think we're able to go to our public, show them the amazing things that we have done as a district for our schools and why we are good stewards of our money and what we could do if they authorize a new bond. I get emails daily from some of the schools, where am I in line on the mod? You know? So we've got lots of needs. We've got a big district, and we've had some really good community members who have supported us through the bond program, and we hope we have made them proud of what we've done with our schools.
No question. So you think 2 or 3 years before we even have to think about it, huh?
I think
Hopefully
so.
the economy will be good. Thank you, Julie.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to leave you with, I will come back at the next board meeting. I'm going to take these recommendations and bring them to you for final approval at that time. But my understanding is each of these is presented. You're seeing that these 4 projects, 1 ratifying the classroom furniture, all seem to be appropriate. Okay, great. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie. Just, if you don't mind, President Girardi, just a quick thank you to Julie that not only are we very proud of all the facilities in the district, and you do such a great job there, I also just think, board, it's nice to see, when I think about these presentations 8 or 9 years ago, the things that we're doing now are all board values. So the shade structures at elementary school, the water filling stations, the technology devices, the green energy. I remember when the board asked about green energy maybe 6 years ago, and it seemed almost impossible. But the battery storage, the electric vehicles for the white fleet, so all of those things, I just think, Julie, you do a great job of taking what the board values and putting it into the plan and making it happen for the district. So thank you very much.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I look forward to coming back to you and sharing that white fleet plan of how we're going to get to EV vehicles. So,
Sounds good. All right, thank you again. Now it takes us to our hearing section for closed session. Members of the audience may at this time address the Board of Education regarding only matters on the closed session agenda. Anybody want to make a comment? All right, seeing no comments, we'll now commence to closed session. Thank you all for everything.